Lovely to see so many people here, and welcome to everyone. And let me just do what we do occasionally. Is anyone not on the mailing list? Is there anyone here whose email we don't have? Because we always like to add people who might be interested in what we're doing. If you're not on the email list, just put your hand up. Everyone is. No, but if you're not, then just if you could give it to Rosemary at the front, and then we can tell you what's happening each month. So welcome to Anna Horsbrugh-Porter, who's very kindly come up from London to do this. We've worked together. I think she's going to introduce us, but we worked together for many years. Went on various BBC reporting trips and so on, and then she threw it all in from the Ministry of Truth of the BBC, I suppose, and has been teaching in London for how many years?
About 8 years now.
For 8 years teaching with some very varied schools. It's been very interesting to hear about what she's doing with that. So she's going to tell us about 1984 and I guess what's happening in America and what it all means for us. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me to come here. It's fantastic. I've never been to Anglesey, so I'm really happy to be here. It's my half term. I'm just going to take off this bracelet, which will clank. So yeah, we worked together in the World Service. As Owen said, I retrained because I felt like a different career at the end of my working life. And I also keep my hand in as a journalist, so I make programmes still for Radio 3 and 4 and occasionally Audible. But now I spend most of my days facing a hostile group of not interviewees, but of 11 to 18-year-old girls. I work at a Catholic state girls' school in Hammersmith. So they're equally truculent as the people that Owen and I used to interview. They are possibly more hostile, and they're definitely more reluctant to get to speak. So I'm very happy to be here, and you appear to be listening. Most of you are smiling. None of you are applying mascara or sticking, that's true, sticking on false eyelashes. Or the current craze is tattooing your legs with biro under the desks. But the worst thing I face is being filmed surreptitiously when I'm dealing with another people. And then the picture plus an obscene message being put up on TikTok by the end of the lesson. So they're very industrious, but they're not necessarily learning English. So this illicit filming that my pupils love, I think has a direct relation to 1984 and what I'm here to talk to you about. Because as we know, it's self-evident that we live in a world now where surveillance, data analytics, misinformation, disinformation is just perpetuating all our lives. And we've walked into it kind of voluntarily. We've signed up for these. We signed up for all the websites that now track us. So that I think it means that the world that what we used to regard as objective truth, or the possibility at least of checking what was truthful and factual, is becoming increasingly unstable, fragile, and unreliable. And as individuals, we've never been under such scrutiny. It's really, really hard to be anonymous these days and to sort of live a kind of normal life in the world that we live in today. And I think this is what Orwell was not necessarily predicting, but certainly the world to some extent that he was depicting in 1984. So he published it in 1948. Did you see what he did with the dates there? And it is the political dystopia to end all dystopias. He kind of said it all, and since then it's been used as a touchstone for successive generations, really, as an oracle. And he seems to speak to each new generation that comes along. So why is it important? And maybe what could possibly be the connection between 1984 being at the top of the US bestseller charts in January 2017 and why it's creeping up there now? So I'm going to ask whether and to what extent we live in George Orwell's world, and what are the key pillars of the dystopia he depicted, and was he a prophet or was he a time traveller? And what's the connection with Steve Bannon? But we'll come on to that later. The language of 1984, Orwell's phraseology, his lexicon, I think it's just permeated our culture nowadays. So that even if you've never read the novel, you barely know anything about the author, I think you'll have heard that phrase, Big Brother's watching you, and many others like Room 101, Doublethink, the Secret Police, the Thought Police, Thought Crime. So it's become a kind of advertising and a kind of shorthand in our media for repression of the individual, for surveillance, for brutal violence. So I thought we'd start really to see where it all came from and start with a bit of biography about Orwell. So he was born in 1903. He was born in what was then Bengal, but is now the state of Bihar in northwest India. There he is with his Indian ayah. He, and then depicted as a slightly weird naval-looking outfit, as a 3-year-old in this landlocked state of India. He must have gone into a photographer's studio. When he was 4, his father was an Indian colonial civil servant, and when he was 4, the family came back to England, but left him behind working. So Orwell was sent, well, Eric as he was then, was sent to a really vile prep school that he hated, but he won a scholarship to Eton from it, and there he is in a group photograph in 1918. After school, he went straight out to Burma, and he trained to be a colonial policeman, and these years were to really haunt him, I think, for the rest of his life. Because straight out of Eton, with its kind of petty rules and rivalries and the brutal flogging of boys and the prefect system, he was thrown into another world that was so similar to the British public school, only the Burmese were being flogged, and he was meant to be the enforcer. But he was a self-confessed terrible policeman. He hated his time there, and he wrote a very famous essay called Shooting the Elephant, which described his moral failure when he was forced to shoot an elephant, much against his will, just to preserve his kind of sense of them and us, his sort of his standing in the community as this authoritarian transmitter of British imperial power. So he became more and more disillusioned with the idea of empire and the reality of being an imperial civil servant. And I think this directly contradicted what he'd been taught all his life, in public schools around at that point. They were training up boys and men like him to be civil servants. But he hated it. And he wrote a novel called Burmese Days. And I think you can see from the quotes that really exemplify his feeling. My whole life, every white man's life in the East was one long struggle not to be laughed at. So the kind of humiliation under the surface of that power system. As for the job I was doing, I hated it more bitterly than I can perhaps make clear. Secretly, of course, I was all for the Burmese and all against their oppressors, the British. He came back from Burma determined to be a writer. And he moved to Paris in 1928, where he didn't succeed. So he took a succession of menial jobs, including washing up in a succession of restaurants. He then went to London and played what he called the part of an amateur tramp, which became his first, I suppose, really famous, lengthy piece of writing called Down and Out in Paris and London, which he published in 1933. And just before, Eric became George, and he changed his name because I think he felt he didn't want to embarrass his very status-conscious middle-class parents, and he also said later that he thought George Orwell had a very working-class ring to it, so I think he was sort of happy to make that transition because it reflected his political ideals as well. Soon after, he went to, in 1936, he went to fight on the Republican side against Franco in the Spanish Civil War. And he was badly injured there. A sniper shot him through the neck and paralyzed his vocal cords. And he was recovering in a sanatorium and then got TB. So really, he never fully recovered, full health after that. And it was a very traumatic time because he was also forced to flee from Soviet-backed communists who were suppressing the kind of revolutionary socialists. So it was a very confusing betrayal of what he thought of as the ideals of communism and the Russian Revolution, what he'd built his political ideals on. He became very violently anti-Stalinist after that time. So he turned to London. He became a sort of protester, an agitator. He was a thorn in the side of the Metropolitan Police, and this is his police file image. He joined the NUJ, National Union of Journalists, and he edited the Tribune, which was a left-wing magazine at the time. He he couldn't fight in World War II because of his injuries that he'd sustained in the Spanish Civil War. So this is when he moved to the BBC World Service and he started working as a journalist and broadcaster. He worked in Bush House, which is where Owen and I both worked, and I think we used to use those mics, didn't we, right at the beginning? Yeah. And at that time, he wrote his news stories, or anything was written on a news story, put into a canister and whizzed around the building in this kind of pneumatic delivery system, which worked by partial vacuums. And this exact mode of writing, mode of delivery, is replicated by Winston Smith when he gets into the Ministry of Information. So he is busy rewriting lies, truth as sort of lies, and he's using the same delivery system in 1984. In London, he also joined the Home Guard, and that's him on the far right, at the back. But the war years were very productive for him as a writer, because in 1945, he published his first masterpiece, which was Animal Farm. Interestingly, he subtitled it A Fairy Story. It is actually a really kind of brutally satirical allegory of Stalin's Russia and the betrayal of the ideals of the Russian Revolution. And it had the famous kind of damning summary of communism, with all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And this is the cover of the first edition, and also the almost contemporary translation into Vietnamese, which is interesting. So on the personal side, he married twice. His first wife, Eileen, on the left, was a psychologist, and she died very young, tragically, of a heart attack when she was having a hysterectomy in 1945. A year before, they'd adopted a 3-week-old baby called Richard, who Orwell brought up. And on the right is his second wife, Sonia, who's closest to the camera, and she married him in 1945. Quite soon after Eileen, and she is meant to be the model for Julia, who's the heroine of 1984. So Orwell wrote the whole novel in Jura, which is, as you know, is an island in this kind of remote Scottish island on the west coast of Scotland. He lived there with Sonia and Richard, and he was dying of tuberculosis as he wrote and as he edited and re-edited the book. And there are many letters going backwards and forwards between him and his editor in London, which was Warburg's. And he was strongly resisting every minor edit, every change. He was intransigent to the end. But Sonia said the effort of writing 1984 killed him. And he died very soon after publication. So Orwell's two most famous novels, Animal Farm and 1984, have been translated into almost 70 languages, which is really astonishing. And they've had this kind of lasting impact on Western culture, and not just Western culture, on kind of understanding of what power and authoritarianism can do to humans. I think even more impressively, they've racked up a huge list of countries where they've been banned, including the state of Florida at the moment, where it's banned for 1984 for its supposedly explicit sexual content, which is extraordinary, because there's about half a page where they finally managed to get together out of the range of the spies in a field, and that literally is the only time they have sex. But ironically, the People's Republic of China, which is perhaps what we might think of as the most quintessentially big brother state in the world today, doesn't ban it, and it's openly discussed. It's never been a kind of issue or problem. But it continues to inspire other protest movements around the world. Orwell believed in the power of fiction as an act of resistance in itself. So you can see from his famous essay in 1946, Why I Write. Every line of serious work that I have written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism, as I understand it. So he felt his political purpose and his political ideals was being channeled directly into his fiction. So I just thought I'd start with a brief summary of the novel. I know lots of you have been reading it or rereading it, but just in case you haven't. In short, 1984 is a society which is sort of predicated on utter human misery. It's about the repression of the individual, constant surveillance, humans betraying humans, mediated by very sudden and sort of unprovoked acts of violence. But above all, it's about lies, it's about propaganda, and it's about manipulation of the truth. And Big Brother is a godlike leader, and he's never seen, but his presence is ubiquitous and all-constraining. And the world of 1984 has been, there are 3 superstates. So there's Oceania, which is the entire continent of America and of the British Isles and of Australia. And there is East Asia, which covers Japan, China, Korea, and northern India. And then Eurasia, which is Europe, Russia, and the kind of former Soviet Union. So I think it's really interesting that if you look at the map of the world today, you can perhaps see analogies that, with increasingly isolationist United States, Putin's Russia, and Xi Jinping in China, we are kind of polarizing in that direction. In the novel, the 3 states are in a perpetual state of war. They kind of swap sides with no apparent logic. So sometimes 2 against 1, sometimes all 3 against each other. And the wars are fought in the disputed areas, running from North Africa through the Middle East and southern India to Southeast Asia. So again, kind of, I suppose, the tinderbox of where wars are happening at the moment, apart from Ukraine. So Britain is called Airstrip 1. London has become a post-apocalyptic city of rubble, constant bombing, rationing, and there's a network of spies which make even the East German Stasi look benign. The state is run by the elite in 4 ministries of love, truth, peace, and plenty. And these are the only kind of new buildings amidst all the rubble. And their names are in direct contravention of what they actually get up to. Winston Smith, who's the hero, works in the Ministry of Truth. And Winston Smith's job is to kind of obliterate history as it happens. So when Oceania changes its enemy, all the newspapers have to be rewritten. All the pictures of the once allies have to be excised. And so truth is a kind of, there is no past truth. History is being constantly rewritten to reflect the present day truth. So enemies of the state just disappear from photographs. Everything's just a shifting, kind of ever-present temporary disinformation. The totalitarian regime, Big Brother kind of obliterates history as it happens, and there is no memory of it, there's nothing to hold on to, except perhaps Winston's inner certainty that things were different, and perhaps we weren't fighting East Asia, but Eurasia. So the Ministry of Truth, where he works, kind of churning out lies and propaganda, was based on Senate House in Mallet Street, which is part of the University of London. Newspeak is Oceania's official language. It's a very simplistic version of English with a very limited vocabulary. So without complex words, the party believed that you couldn't express, you had no words with which to express yourself and no words with which to communicate. So language in any dystopia, language is always a risky business, because if you have language and freedom of speech, then you can rouse dissent, you can kind of, foment rebellion. So Big Brother's mantra was that if you don't have the words to say it, then you can't think it. So, you're kind of conditioned not to be able to form alliances. So life for the party workers is very grim. Sorry, I think I meant to move on from that. So Orwell said, the aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought. In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there'll be no words with which to express it. This is still from a film, which I'll explain later, but there is no private life. So maybe echoing a little bit of what we're living with today. Surveillance is constant and relentless. The thought police are everywhere. Horrible children are indoctrinated to spy on their parents and turn them in, which they do frequently. Telescreens are two-way, so that the telescreens speak to you, and it's not just kind of consumption one way. Love is a threat to the state's control, so there's no intimacy, there's no kind of alliances of families, there's no sex, which isn't for procreation. And I think the famous opening of 1984 reflects the settling and destabilizing world that Orwell depicts. So it was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. On each landing opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. The Ministry of Love, where Winston Smith ends up, is a state prison where all dissidents are tortured until they capitulate. It usually happens in room 101, where individuals face their worst fear, whatever that is. For Winston, it was for a rat gnawing his face. So this was the contraption they set up to break him, and they did. And this is a still from a film that was released in 1984 with Richard Burton playing the party apparatchik O'Brien and John Hurt as Winston. So the final piece of the puzzle in 1984 are the proles, the mass of the population which form 85% of George Orwell's world, and then the Marxist proletariat. They're the underclass, and they're mostly left to themselves, so they can live pretty normal lives that we'd recognise. They can go to pubs, they can have sex, they can visit prostitutes, they can criticise the party openly, they can carry on their lives, which are basically post-war rationed working-class London lives. But the proles are no threat to the state because they are subdued and controlled by a cynical form of mass entertainment, not only football, beer and gambling, but also porn. So they watch porn churned out from an automatic machine called the pornosec, which is in the pornography section of the Ministry of Truth. They read pulp fiction and cheap romances, which are mechanically, again, produced by no human intervention to pacify them. And the grotesquely depicted prole women sing the latest songs produced by the versificator. So there's no creativity. Creativity is kind of just a means of control. And for Orwell, I think porn was the opium of the people, not religion. So maybe it's time to get back to this man. Because what I've been suggesting about 1984 might feel very far-fetched, kind of far from our world. Maybe North Korea, thought control, state-sponsored torture, no freedom of speech, Assad Syria, Iran under the Ayatollah, but certainly not we would think of as our lives in the West. But this is Steve Bannon, Trump's master strategist, the MAGA architect, and the propagandist of lies above all. He's speaking here just a few hours after getting out of a federal prison for contempt of Congress. It's a week before the October 2024 election, and his kind of mantra is disorientation, confusion, just telling so many lies that it's actually impossible to pin anyone down at a time. So he said it first to the writer Michael Lewis in 2018, and I quote, "The Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." So that's the moral compass of Trumpian politics, but it's very Orwellian, and it's very Big Brother. There's a writer called Adam Gopnik, which you may know, who's a staff writer for The New Yorker. I think it was March this year, he was reflecting on he was drawing links between Orwell and the Trump second administration, and he said, "And so rereading Orwell, one is reminded of what Orwell got right about this kind of brute authoritarianism, and that was essentially that it rests on lies told so often and so repeatedly that fighting the lie becomes simply not more dangerous, but more exhausting than repeating it. Orwell saw to his credit that the act of falsifying reality is only secondarily a way of changing perceptions. It is, above all, a way of asserting power." So disinformation, misinformation, the swirling kind of amplifier of the wormhole that is some parts of the internet, bots and algorithms, and the targeted campaigns to sway voters that we kind of somehow become accommodated to and think, well, does it work? I don't know how much influence it has. This is what Orwell was talking about. Deep fakes and influencers, and where is the truth, and how can we find it, and how do we know it? How can we identify it? And maybe this is what we should be teaching our children now. It's how to navigate this world. It's how to kind of discern the truth. It's how to be able to spot a bot. So another aspect of 1984, which is sort of self-evident, but is the cult of personality. Big Brother keeps control of Oceania through a cult of personality, just like all dictators have in the past. Just, you know, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Mussolini, Saddam Hussein, Kim Jong-il, the list goes on. And they rule through power and fear, but also through image and icon, through flattery and praise and mass propaganda, and by whipping up emotion, and by, above all, by repression of the individual. So this is some pictures of Trump when he was campaigning in Wisconsin in about the autumn of 2024. I don't know if you can see that, but it says Trump, chosen by God. Here he is at one of his rallies, where they kept moving people around to fill up the spaces, apparently, but they didn't quite manage to get it in there. And this is his official chair that he's had commissioned for the Oval Office. Oh no, it can't be the Oval Office, somewhere in the White House. So New York Times said, I think it was an op-ed recently, the president is at the center of a brazenly transactional ecosystem that rewards flattery and lockstep loyalty. And I think we've just seen that in Trump's visit to the Middle East, to Qatar and to Saudi Arabia, and the kind of transactional deals and planes that, you know, and the kind of cryptocurrency deals that are going on. And oligarchs, favor-seekers, and sycophants are all around, either at the beginning of the end of democracy or at the beginning of a rebirth, New York Times said. So I just want to consider for a moment, is there a link with Trump and what he considers to be woke language and the Newspeak of 1984? Because US government memos now warn against using the kind of Trumpian hate words like clean energy and disability, equal rights, DEI, which is disability, equality, and inclusion. The hate word gender, LGBT, and they've just vanished. And it's not only Trump supporters who are doing it. I mean, I think if you want to survive right now, you have to mind your language. You have to kind of do a double think or a self-censorship. And I've got a friend who works for the UNDP, which is United Nations Department of Development Program, sorry. And she, every year she writes a report for funding that then goes towards the full UN, and it's got through. But she has now, this month, has been rewriting it to kind of make it more ambiguous, to kind of obfuscate exactly what she wants, to take out all these words that would trigger kind of the US pulling out its funding. I think it's a classic case of Orwell's doublethink. And I remember talking to a colleague we had who reported during the Cold War from East Berlin called Donald Armour, and he also mentioned this. He had to be really wary in reporting to the BBC, but not being infected by the sort of repression and fear and constraints on people that he was living with, and said that he didn't self-censor, and he called it schwer in dem Kopf haben. So you had this kind of, literally, the literal translation, you had these scissors in your head. So you sort of self-censored before you ever said something or wrote something. It was almost automatic. So, you know, the famous slogans from 1984, war is peace, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. It's kind of these slogans that just subvert whatever we understand as moral values or desirable attributes. Trump has described the attack on the Capitol on the 6th of January 2021 as a beautiful day, a day of love. This is all the lovely people. And when he pardoned the rioters, soon after his inauguration, he pardoned the rioters and they left jail. He said they had love in their hearts. I think everyone's doing it. Orwellian is an adjective that kind of denotes repression, fear, freedom of, kind of denial of freedom of speech, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the right or the left. Even J.D. Vance used it recently when he was condemning the EU's hate speech laws. So it's ironically kind of turning in on itself, how Orwell can be used by successive generations. And this is the T-shirt that was printed after the then US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, sent round details of strikes against the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and he sent it on his private Signal group. But unfortunately, he also included the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, so it got out. not only did the White House kind of defame Jeffrey Goldberg shamelessly, but they also attempted to say that the information wasn't classified, that it was nothing kind of incriminating going out on this chat group. But hundreds of people counted this, and hundreds of people posted the same Orwell quote on the internet, and then had the T-shirt printed, which said, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." But it's not just Trump and his henchmen, of course. I think Orwell was writing about men he knew, like Hitler, Stalin, Franco, Mussolini, and the violent kind of mass movements they inspired. But he was also warning about dangerous tyrants to come, men like Erdogan, Modi, Orban, Maduro, events such as Duterte's mass killings in the Philippines and Bukele's wave of arrests in El Salvador, and Xi Jinping's ubiquitous surveillance and the re-education in the concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims, and the repressive institutionalized torture going on in China. So this is a quote that was, I think last week, Sandra Newman, she rewrote 1984 from Julia's point of view, and it's a really interesting novel that came out last year. And she said, "Orwell's great political works speak to our current moment, when seemingly every country is infested with would-be autocrats using the old playbooks where their lines about enemies of the people and lying media and globalists." So finally, no one can claim that Orwell was an optimist. And there are very few jokes in 1984. In fact, I can't think of any. There are a few in Animal Farm. But his serious vision of the future was unremittingly bleak. And this may have been something to do with he was writing it on his deathbed. But the novel's last words echo the beginning, which are with nihilistic rhetoric. So this is the end of 1984. "There will be no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever." That's the end. Thank you very much.
Well, that was an absolutely magnificent exposition of what Orwell was saying and why we should worry about it. If any of your pupils are putting mascara on during that, they should be utterly ashamed of themselves. And that's absolutely fascinating and so relevant to what is going on today. And he was obviously a totally brilliant man. And he did understand what was happening before his time. Just one question. You talked about the four ministries: Ministry of Truth, Ministry of Love, Ministry of Plenty, and Ministry of one other.
Peace.
And it seems to me that most of the stuff that he said that is so relevant to us is Ministry of Truth sort of area.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But then you were also saying other things like this lack of creativity, which is AI, right? I mean, that is what AI is doing. I mean, you can write a whole novel now without even thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. And Pornhub, you can get anything you want.
And all the pornography that he was predicting, sort of pacifying the masses, and all our children are addicted to this pornography. I mean, it is astonishingly, he's just very aware of what was going on. It's remarkable. And you've explained it incredibly well, so thank you. And let's get some questions about what we've heard. Yeah, there's a question from our historian who gave a very good talk on rewriting history and the purpose of history and how it wasn't just telling us what happened in the past, but actually for other purposes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is that good? Yeah, thank you very much. The one thing about Orwell is it's not just, I mean, you did mention it, but he's not just predicting the future, although the example of the machine that turns out tunes, it was only a hopeless fancy, I believe the song was called, that the woman in the yard kept singing, the tune that the party used, the machine that the party used, which is an example of AI. But a lot of what Orwell's talking about, it actually was recent history, and history really that you can trace back to the French Revolution, So, for example, in Germany, you have the Ministry of Propaganda and Popular Enlightenment, which is actually what it's called. And Goebbels, because his diaries survive, by and large, the Minister for Propaganda and Popular Enlightenment, talks about how to engage in propaganda and how to do it. And famously makes a film right at the end of the Second World War in which he says this will be watched in 200 years and no one will remember Nazi Germany lost the war, and that will be the thing. So a lot of what Orwell was doing was actually issuing a warning rather than predicting the future. And if you remember, you talked a lot about the right in the United States, and of course everyone goes on about Trump and all the rest of it, but what you can also talk about is since the 60s, the attack on rational thought from the left and postmodernism and the like, and the denial of truth and the denial of objectivity has created a way in which mass appeal of describing stuff as fake news and the like can actually get in there. So it's not just, both sides are actually guilty of it. In the same way, we could talk about Nazi Germany, but one of the major reasons that Nazi Germany came about was because not only the Nazis became the largest party in Germany, but the communists also worked to destroy Weimar Germany as well. So what I'm saying is, it's from both sides we're working towards this thing. And the trouble is with the United States, I mean, we've got to understand is the polarization of matters as well, where we have places like Seattle collapsing, and San Francisco, etc., and defund the police and all the rest of it. And it's really bad polarization, and there's no common ground at all.
Yeah.
And that's a really bad thing in any society that purports to be democratic.
So it's a very interesting point. I mean, the post-truth stuff, a lot of it came from left-wing liberal academics in the universities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely take on board what you're saying about Nazi Germany. And I think I was focusing on how it's relevant to us now. But of course, he was warning immediately post-Second World War about what had just happened and why it shouldn't happen again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Anna. Thank you. I'm a bit reluctant to follow that, really. But my question will be a little... Well, it's not a question. What an extraordinarily good talk that was.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just say that? Because we have a lot of good talks here. Yeah, and that was right up there.
Thank you very much.
It's not a question. I just want to say that the last slide was hauntingly reminiscent of George Floyd, wasn't it?
Well, the one before this?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Which is...
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And the other thing, I think I'm erring towards prophet rather than time traveller. In retrospect, now I've heard your talk. Yeah, that's with a PH. Because I actually think he was probably just a bloody good storyteller. Because if you become an adjective, then you've got to have something going for you.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling is that relating it to our lives, the enemy is social media. It's got to be. That's what penetrates everyone's life, is social media. And you mentioned Duterte in the Philippines. Well, he got elected on the back of a social media campaign to say that drugs and there was almost dystopia existing unless they elected him.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a terrible statement about he would treat drug takers as Hitler treated the Jewish people, which was a terrible. So he got elected on the back of social media. So that's how penetrative it is. And I guess in the Philippines it's easier to do because it's a lot of islands, isn't it? And so there's not a lot of cross-pollination of information between that. But I think the dystopia is going to come from social media. And I also think that our biggest weapon against that happening is probably that novel.
Yeah, thank you. Very good point.
Just got Barbara would like to ask a question. So, any comments on what Roger just said, though, in terms of, I mean, social media
I suppose to counter it, you could say that the Green Revolution in Iran, there are good things that come out of social media, that it is, especially through telegraph, it is a means of connecting people in a repressive society. So I absolutely understand what you said. I think it's kind of out of control that we don't really realise just how penetrative it is. But there are some positive ways that it is being used.
Anna, just
Yes,
to
Rob.
echo what Roger said, I thought it was fantastic. I don't have a view to share, or at least not an interesting enough one. A genuine question.
Yeah.
Happy to share my ignorance. My latest connection with 1984 was the Radio 4 reading. I think it was over Christmas, but I don't recall it in detail. Is there in the book any reference to the beneficiary of this system? Because all these dictators, whether it's Assad or Trump, we see the benefits to them of this wonderful life they live and great opulence. Is there any hint of who that person or people are in the book?
Because as usual, one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. So the very elite, the party workers, there's a great scene when O'Brien, who betrays Winston Smith, they go to his flat and there's kind of wine and there's carpet on the floors and there's kind of pipe music, and he pretends to turn off the telescreen, which you're not allowed to do. And in fact, he doesn't, because then they use it against Winston. So I think every dystopia has this elite that benefit, and that's the rest of them are propping up the machine.
Yeah.
Oh, very quickly. Thank you very much. That was very, very powerful. But I want to push back, give you something to argue with. I think these trends that you're describing and identifying or as sort of prefigured in what Orwell was saying is very close to irresistible. You're right. On the other hand, isn't it true historically that, and I mean over the broad sweep of history, I don't just mean since the Enlightenment, but over time, other aspects of human nature assert themselves and push back against tyranny, against oppression, and that what we're in, so that what the prophecy in Orwell is about this existential struggle that we're now going to be engaged in for the best of human nature. And it's very, very hard to do this, it seems to me, without some richer sense of what we all share, which religion in past eras perhaps provided, totally different circumstances. I'm not saying revisit that. But of what we all share, because, human nature does have immense positive possibilities.
Yes.
Read Marilyn Robinson on human nature. And so it seems to me not credible that this will simply be extinguished. I've talked to people who lived in East Germany, who knew about the lies and who resigned themselves to living lives, that were constrained. But they didn't stop being full of these human realities.
I think that's a really good point. And Marilyn Robinson is a fantastic author. I love her. But she that is through religious kind of humanity and the sort of the saviour of how we're going to get through it. I think it is about endurance, and Orwell talks about the proles. He said the hope lies with the proles. This is going to be any solution, it will be the proles, overthrowing the masses, because they have they're the mass of the population. He also did an addendum to the novel, which I didn't go into, but then he talked about it in the past tense as if it's a relic that has been discovered. So people can say that is his way of saying that it's over, it was a past, and this is more, you can interpret it as a more positive way of viewing his vision.
But in the end of the book, if I remember it right, the main character comes to accept
Yeah,
and
he
the most
says that,
depressing thing is that he comes to accept everything that he tried to resist.
yeah, and he absolutely believes it.
And
And he
absolutely
betrays
believes it.
everybody, so he betrays his...
But you're saying that there's
You-
more resistance
Yeah,
in that.
I'll if I may.
Oh, yeah, go
Yeah,
for it, yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on what Robin was saying, that this sweep of history thing. I'm really fascinated by Iron Age and Bronze Age cultures, and I think of Caligula and what was happening in Rome at that type of time. And I'm going to... That's so powerful, that really powerful talk thing. I'm going to do a Amal Rajan-like thesis, all right? And my thesis is it's an emergent feature of the density of human population, because I can't imagine this type of thing would have gone on in little pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer tribes, but it's once they start to get dense populations, and when people
Fighting for
starting
resources.
to develop their ways of making their living that aren't just feeding themselves. Anyway, that's me. So,
Yeah, there's a question here at the front. Since I know you've been reading the book today.
Hello. I think my question is a natural follow-on from the previous one. Abolition of independent thought, and you mentioned that you teach youngsters, and so you must have some awareness of how our society is doing in that respect in our densely populated London. You know, we have 21st century new speak, such as wokeism, which you mentioned, and virtue signalling. That's another expression that is bandied around quite a lot. So how would you say your girls and their parents are doing in terms of the abolition or not of independent thought?
I think about that the whole time, because my kids are in their 20s and 30s, and I think they escaped that to some extent. I think it's the ones now who've never known anything different, and their parents increasingly have never known any different way of getting their information and kind of communicating with each other. And the biggest problem we have in the school is WhatsApp groups between parents criticising us a lot, which is fair enough, but then becomes really nasty. And also WhatsApp groups with the kids all bullying each other mercilessly all the time. And we all hear about it, but actually you see the kid the next day and then you find out what's happened to them. And you think this is just soul destroying. Yeah. But allied to that, I was discussing with Owen, they use, AI is now the way they, any homework, I have to think, how are they going to use AI for it? So anything I want written creatively, I do it longhand in class. Yes. But I don't think I think you can't, you're talking about freedom of thought. I think unless you are on your own without any distractions, without any other people telling you how to write or how to phrase it, you can't really express yourself. I think we can teach them, but then you have to be on your own and you have to really formulate your own ideas about how you...
Alone, are they? Because of the
No.
Digital devices.
Unless, like, sit them alone.
Sorry.
Sit them alone in a desk with a piece of paper and a pen and just say, do this.
Write something.
Write something.
can you wait till the microphone comes to you, Joe?
We'll come back to you. There's a question here at the front. Yep.
Whereabouts?
Just right there. Yep.
Thank you for your talk. Very impressive, equally depressing, yes. I think. We've had a view that the broad sweep of history gets rid of dictators and totalitarian states. But really the weapons that they have now in the form of media are of a different order of magnitude. Not in the broad sweep of history, but in the shorter term. What do you see as the solution? What's the antidote?
To all the way social media and deep fakes are exposing or influencing everybody.
Recognising that that's the problem, what realistically can be done about it?
I think it must be about teaching us how to recognise, teaching the all of us, just to have a critical awareness as much as possible and to really be able to spot what is coming across and just to question. I mean, journalists, we're used to questioning everything. And, you know, what was that Jeremy Paxman thing? Why is that lying to me now? So that's how you approach every interview, because everybody wants to get something out of an interview. But I think as a consumer, you've got to also get that very sceptical kind of who's benefiting from this, who paid for this.
I mean,
You know,
I'll just add one thing here. I mean, I think in terms of the social media, which obviously is so dangerous and ubiquitous, there are things that should be done. The first thing, which is quite a simple reform, is that there should be no anonymous accounts. And it's, you know, China's done it for the wrong reasons, probably. We could be doing it for the right reasons, and people are hiding behind this and spreading disinformation, and states are doing it, individuals are doing it, crazy people are doing it, and if they couldn't hide behind the anonymity that's allowed, that would stop. I mean, it would be significantly reduced. I mean, why hasn't that happened? Yeah, because they're so powerful and they're so rich, and they're buying governments in the end. When social media bosses are challenged, the French government, to their huge credit, arrested the guy who runs Telegram for allowing paedophilia and drug trafficking and arms trafficking on his site. He immediately caved. Having been a free speech champion for his whole life, he said, I'll give you all the information you need to stop these terrible crimes. When a state took a stand, which the French did, it stopped. And so there are things that we can do in the social media sphere to resist the power of these oligarchs who are running our lives. I think it's possible, yeah.
So 1984 showed us what can happen when the state has full control. But as we see advances in computer technology, you've stolen some of my wind with your response there. The problems of social media and the dark web can be controlled by regulation. I worked in IT for 40 years. Every device that a person uses to go onto the internet should be registered to that individual. So a child who's 13 has to be registered and verified by the parent or guardian. That will drip feed through social content as they advance in age. We should also track all access to the dark web, and that is notified to the authorities, who can then close down these sites. It's all possible with the technology.
Yeah.
We do need regulation. I know this chart's been about states regulating. Australia are leading the world. We should do the same. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I was in Chile last year, and you have to, even as a tourist, after a couple of months, you have to register your phone as a tourist and put all your details in. And it's got a very advanced, so kind of the way of keeping control of their
I mean, it
devices.
is insane that something that's causing so much damage to our culture is not being dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, somebody was saying the other day that we're going to wake up and think we abused this generation of children. We kind of let it happen, you know, and we're walking into it with our eyes closed.
Thank you so much for a really, really interesting lecture.
Thank you.
Last winter, I decided to immerse myself in George Orwell.
Yeah.
So I got myself a DVD and I reread his major novels. I'd read Animal Farm at school, which was immediately after the war, and I was shocked this time how much I had missed of Nazism and so forth, which was very real to me, and I hadn't noticed it around me then. And going back to 1984 and Trump, I find myself addicted to what Trump is doing, and I can't understand this because I hate every utterance, and yet I feel I must read every column in the paper about it, and so I feel I'm being manipulated. But I'm so much aware of little seeds of everything. I listen a lot to Radio 4, and Michael Rosen is talking about Newspeak, and it's true, you know, that there's a new language coming up which is unintelligible to those who aren't on social media. I'm not a social media person, but I find Doonesbury cartoons are gently ribbing Trump's inability to talk. And the fact that if anything he hasn't heard of before, it's brand new, never heard of before. And he's telling people it's brand new. It's not. It's just that he hasn't experienced it. And what really, really worries me is his interference with Harvard and his interference with the Supreme Court. Because if truth is manipulated, we rely on truth.
Yeah.
Then justice is rubbish, and education is rubbish if it's all manipulated. Where are we going?
Can I just pick up on one thing you said there and ask you what if it's in the novel? This business that you can't bear what Trump is saying, and yet you can't stop yourself listening to it. I mean, that is an astonishing situation, and he has got this idea of attention, that he has to be constantly commanding everyone's attention. And it's amazing. I mean, in the White House now, there is basically a 24-hour press conference. I mean, wherever he is, he's got press cameras with him, and he is constantly talking to the American public, minute by minute. I mean, he'll go into a minute for half an hour, and then it's an hour with the press. So there is this idea, which I don't think Orwell got, did he, that somehow the Big Brother figure can command our minds with us giving him the attention he craves. I mean, it's an amazing idea.
And all the gold in the Oval Office. Have you seen the mantelpiece?
All the bling, yeah.
It's so. What's the
he-
word
not-
for it? Vulgar.
He wasn't onto the attention economy, was he?
Yeah, but I think he's also very charismatic, and however much we don't like to...
It's not charisma, it's addiction in my case.
It's I'm not saying you're taken in by his charisma, but I think as a person for his MAGA supporters, he is, he's relaxed, he's funny, he's not like Biden, he's not like Kamala Harris. He manages to make them feel they're on the right bandwagon, they're going to be okay with him, they're going to get there. So I think he's a complicated man.
Yeah, okay, great. And then Jerry had a point, which we'll get to. Yeah.
Anna, thank you very much. Very powerful, very incisive. Can I just lift the mood a little bit before we all reach for our mascara and large gin and tonics? My niece was in Liverpool recently with her 3 sons when that drug-ridden loony rammed into the crowd, and she's all right, and her boys were all right.
But they were at the parade for the...
Yeah, they 1 minute they were singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," the next minute there were screams, and we've all read the papers. But what she did remark on was the number of Scousers who said to people who were scared, frightened, screaming, whatever, come and stay with us, for whatever long it takes and so on. All I'm saying is, and this reflects, I think, Ross and I get, there are still people, not Trump people, who are kind and loving and caring.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't...
Exactly, well, we shouldn't despair.
We shouldn't despair.
Yes, good. Well brought up, thank you.
Jerry had a point, and then someone else indicates to me, and then we'll get to someone. Yep, okay.
Sorry, yeah. One really interesting aspect about Orwell is where he talks about language, and that's why I think people, to understand Orwell properly, really should read his collected essays, which are published in 4 volumes. And one of the most amazing essays is an essay called Politics in the English Language, in which he talks about the way that, I think the opening line is, we all agree the English language is in a bad way. And so therefore, when we're talking about words like woke, Orwell prefigures that in a really interesting way, because he talks about doublethink, which you mentioned, but he also talks about the specific word duckspeak, which applied to an opponent is abuse, and applied to an ally is praise. And that's exactly like the term woke, which is worn as a badge of pride by some people and used as a term for abuse by other people. But this has been going on in the United States for a long time, and the word liberal, you could insert that in the majority of these conversations. And they've gone on. And in the United States, we've got to remember there's a long lineage of this, which we haven't discussed in the UK. And what they used to be called in the United States was the culture wars. And we've never had that in the United Kingdom. And now that's why social media is such a dangerous thing in the United Kingdom, because all of a sudden people feel empowered. And you can talk about that, you're talking about that Liverpool thing, when we're talking about social media. Well, the fact of the matter is, we found out who that guy was, where he was from, what was going on, and that was because ordinary people have phones on their cameras now, which was the difference between that and the attacks last year in Southport, where disinformation was provided by the authorities, or no information was provided by the authorities. So that's why people see social media as a leveling thing. And unfortunately, your pupils, like my pupils that I teach, regard filming you as a way of leveling up the power relationship.
Yeah, or just maybe, you know, getting fun out of a very boring lesson.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
of course.
they're just, I mean, they don't know what they're, but it's interesting what you said about the culture wars not happening here. I mean, I think McCarthy was what set the culture wars in the States, when you kind of had, when you had to keep your low profile or make a choice. But I think the trans debate here has been a very vocal culture wars. Don't know what you think, but that has really split. It's caused a lot of, you know, a lot of pain and a lot of misunderstanding on both sides.
Well, thank you. As everybody said, fascinating discussion. I was half listening to a news report the other day, so apologies if my facts are not quite right. But it was broadly along the lines that about 30% to a third of the younger generation now believe the best political solution is autocratic, non-democratic.
Yeah, I saw that report.
And I just wondered if your insight as a teacher could explain why that's happening. You know, is democracy losing the argument?
Oh, that's a big... I think it's horrifying. I don't know the demographics, whether it was, you know, gendered at all, whether it was more young men who thought that autocracy was a better form.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Well, let's throw that open. Does anyone have
Yeah.
any view on why our young people are losing faith in democracy? I mean, we can all understand the failings of our governments to do what they say they're going to do and the difficulties they face, but why is it getting this critical? Yes.
Well, I think you just said it. Politicians, they fucked us up for years with lies all the time. They take the before they're voted in, they say they're going to do something. As soon as they get in, they've totally forgotten that, and they're there to line their own pockets. And not all of them, but a large majority. And we saw what happened during COVID, and how many politicians and politicians' friends and dogs and everybody made an absolute fortune, and we paid for it.
I mean, there is another way of looking at it, that politicians, they do make promises, but they're, you know...
They're constrained by
they're constrained
democracy.
by our ridiculous expectations of what they can do. Yeah.
I mean, I think just to answer, maybe one explanation is that the generation, they haven't, you know, it's a long, long time since we had World War, since we had a kind of period of suffering in this country. So maybe we've got complacent with democracy. Maybe we think it's just always going to be like this, and, you know, added to your point with disillusion with the political system. But maybe it's naivety.
Yeah.
Hi. My question is more about the media in general rather than just social media. It strikes me that the ownership of media corporations is a significant problem, in that there's very little oversight, if you like, on what is promoted as factual news. I've very much given up on the BBC, and I tend to watch France 24, because there's a very much more balanced discussions where they don't engage with politicians, but they engage with experts in particular fields. What is your thought on that?
On the BBC being unbalanced, or it's always a question that comes around again and again. I think when we were working there, especially for the BBC World Service, it was genuinely, we had a very international outlook, and we had a purpose that we were trying to speak to, you know, kind of give facts to listeners who didn't have access to the same kind of information they needed. So I think that was I don't know, I felt that was my justification for working there, and it was never in question that we were always working with the correspondents on the ground and the reporters and kind of compiling when we worked on programs together. But I know that Al Jazeera, for instance, is very, I'm not saying it's an exclusive property of the BBC, that we have a kind of, automatic claim to independent broadcasting, and Al Jazeera is a really good outfit, isn't it? And often we go there to get balance.
It's a bit of an advert, but I actually made a podcast about your question yesterday called Control Alt Deceit, and it's on precisely the issue of press ownership and what it means for what is coming out of our media, not just social media, but obviously that's incredibly important now with highly politicised figures like Musk and so on. But for what it's worth, the BBC, having worked there, as you worked there for 30 years, I've worked there for 40 years, is trying to do something which is impartial news, and it is basically increasingly impossible to do it because our culture is now tribalised and no one wants it. And those on the right won't trust it, those on the left don't trust it. And I mean, the BBC, to its credit, has incredibly high trust ratings still in the, I think, high 70s, which is far more than any of the newspapers. And it is declining because it's not part of our culture now to want this objective, impartial news. Of course, not perfect. No one says it is, but that is, I can assure you, the only objective of everyone working there. They are desperately bending over backwards to try and make it as impartial as they can, and it doesn't work anymore because people have got their post-truth beliefs. And so it's a very difficult situation for impartial broadcast. People are trying to do it. I think it's a failed model. I think it's not going to work in the future because people don't want it. They want their tribal politics.
Well, people in this country don't want it. I think there are plenty of other people around the world who still.
People around the world like it because they understand the value of this real information they're getting on what's happening in their country. So from the World Service point of view, we've got mass audiences. But it is. These are difficult issues. Yeah. I'll ask you to come back in a moment. Okay, Bobby, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
I've got the microphone. I was, all my life, I've kind of understood that our form of democracy and our form of governance is unquestionably the right way. And, you talk about kids these days not necessarily believing that. And, what occurred to me was actually, if you consider what's happened in China over the last 20 or 30 years, whether you accept or don't accept the downsides of what's happened there, it's an incredible economic miracle that they've achieved. And I think it's entirely reasonable that as a society we should be open to the question of actually, is that a better way of governing a country? And I think it's wrong that we kind of, just as the McCarthyism in the States totally discounted communism and so on. Well, I think that we should be more open to considering other forms of governance.
That's a hand grenade.
Any comments?
For anyone else? Instinctively, I really push against that, I think. I don't know what everyone else thinks. I mean, I just think to be part of the Chinese economic miracle has, undoubtedly lifted world poverty by, isn't it 1% by the whole of, but the price it's paid, I would say, and the price individuals are still paying, I think is too high. And, Xi Jinping is just, what he's doing across Africa, with, and across Asia where we used to live with the kind of, what's it called, Belt and Roads. I think it's a really insidious way of entrapping countries into this kind of economic ties with China, that it's very clever, it's very insidious. And I think I read today that the top 5 broadcasters around the world are all Chinese broadcasters. Because they're doing what we're not doing, we're attracting, but China's pushing out there to the rest of the world to get its influence. And So I understand what you're saying, but I think I would not want to live in China right now.
So we'll do two things.
At the peril of losing democracy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll come to Roger, and then I'd like you to come back on anything you want to say. So you put your hand up afterwards if you want
I
to.
was just.
Roger first.
I might have got this wrong, but was it a young cohort of people who were favouring autocracy? Whoever. Young percentage of people. And I was just going to say, well, what do they watch? They don't watch the news. They don't go to rallies. They don't come to Think Ross Niger. Where do they get it from? I'm sorry to bang on about it, but social media is the enemy.
I'm just coming to you, sir. No, Mark, right in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for me come back. My concerns are that the news that
Bit closer.
the news that people get distributed from things like the BBC news app is dependent on what you've signed up to. So unless you are aware of other aspects around the world, it becomes very difficult to challenge things. Now, I've worked in all sorts of places across the world in civil engineering. I've seen some horrendously corrupt organizations, mostly, I might say, American. But the situation is that in other places, like in Europe, in Northern Europe, you get a much better coverage of the whole world rather than this constant leaning towards America that we have in the UK.
Well, the answer to that is to listen to the BBC World Service. But I do know what you mean. I mean, it is very much. We've got a few minutes left. Can we see if there are lots of, if there are a group of questions we could take if people haven't had a chance to say what they want to say? Yes. And anyone else, just indicate to me now and we'll try and get to you. Yep.
Owen, you just recently said that you thought that the BBC's model of impartial reporting was at its end because...
Well, it's challenged, yeah.
Yeah, challenged then, because...
Bit closer.
Because society is tribal and did not want impartial reporting. But do you think that's because they no longer recognise what impartial reporting is?
Well, there's more 1984 territory, I think, where all our brains are getting addled by the social media messaging and by, we're in a sort of more turbulent information world, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think having this on one side and then on the other, I mean, I think that's becoming more antithetical, isn't it? You can't have both sides presented at once. You have to be on one, as you said, the tribalism. And I think kind of this politely, not politely, but this kind of style of interviewing that is very stand back. You don't, BBC journalists never declare their political affiliations. I never knew how anybody was voting at work. I think maybe that's changing, and you have to, social media forces you to take a stand, to kind of pin your colours to the mast a bit more. And so that natural reticence that I think I feel about talking about my politics is, I think, journalists now are less and less determined by that, do you think?
It's quite an interesting point. I mean, in the BBC, I literally have worked there for 40 years and do not know how my colleagues vote. And that, I think, is old-fashioned.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, yeah. And sort of increasingly unsustainable. And certainly on social media, that's not how it works.
Yeah, there was a Hungarian journalist who was there for years before us, and he used to say that the first thing he was told by his boss was, two things for the BBC. When you come into the studio, you hang up your jacket and your political opinions in there before you go into the studio. And I think the other one was never eat at a clean table in the canteen because it's just been washed by a filthy rag.
Any other questions? Or is that everything for everyone? Well, look, that's been an absolutely fascinating conversation and very big themes because you dealt with such a brilliant author who understood these themes ahead of his time, and we're very grateful to you.
Thank you very much.
So